So we now welcome a dialogue with Marco Guzzi and Mauro Ventola as they discuss Towards a New Consciousness. Marco Guzzi is a poet, philosopher, professor, and founder of the inner liberation groups Darsi Pace. He is known to have conversations on the pedagogy of the new humanity, the essence of the conscience, the initiation, and the new economics. Since 2008, he has been invited as a professor of the Faculty of Educational Sciences of the Cilician Pontifical University. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI appointed him a member of the Pontifical Academy of Fine Arts and Letters of the Virtuous at the Pantheon. He is the author of numerous volumes, both in the poetic and theoretical spheres. Mauro Ventola is the director of the Psychosynthesis Center in Naples and a member of the board of directors of the Institute of Psychosynthesis, founded by 𝗦𝗦𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 courage to will, conversations for the future, the way of personal transformation, and to decide from being. Thank you for being with us today, Marco and Mauro. We look forward to the conversation.
I am very excited. First of all, I would like to thank the Community of Living Ethics and also Agni Yoga Society, Italian Society, for having asked us to deliver our contribution. And of course, thank you all for making this possible online. The challenge tonight is a hard one, is a tough one. I will kind of set the context before I launch the first theme. We're going to introduce a conversation, an open conversation, which has a very bold objective and very difficult challenge for me. Under this title, Towards a New Consciousness, in approx 45 minutes, the objective is to provide you with a significant conversation that matters around the nature of cosmic consciousness and the implications of human soul for human transformation. And this goal to reflect, to ponder around the cosmic consciousness fits in a general project, which is one of the purpose of this conference, to deliver contribution and to start sowing seeds for a culture of cosmic consciousness. So this is why I'd love to introduce the conversation for the first time, Marco, because actually we never spoke about this conversation before. So what it means for me to create this culture of the cosmic consciousness? Well, it means that we want to set the context, the right one, the context that is using us. The form of life that we are, the form of human beings we are, depends upon the horizon we live in. And like it has been said in the conference also, by the forms thought which are composing this horizon. So reflecting on that, it means that we try to understand something that comes from the future. So a cosmic conversation, perhaps what 𝗦𝗢𝗖𝗜𝗔𝗟 would call the super consciousness, that if we were there, it would allow us to be right in that state that we are aiming at. And that conversation is made of important words which are shaping a network. And I will try, along with Marco, to use a language rather than teaching on conveying information around the cosmic consciousness. I want to highlight distinctions. I want to have a language that unveils some components of our inner life that we could not see before. Something that delivers new openings to the being and to the action. So, and what can we do also, again, when we pursue the cosmic consciousness? Now, that said, that is very much the goal of this research, the very first topic that I would like to touch base upon is, let's try to clarify the nature of the cosmic consciousness and the role in the human evolution. So first of all, what is it? What is the interpretation, and what is the role in the human evolution? And I would like to read a quote of a Russian pioneer who wrote a book around this topic, and he says, "The shape of cosmic consciousness is not necessary to life. In absence of that, we may still live. But without that, it is impossible to organize and orient life." Well, I found this statement enlightening because it helps me understand something around the cosmic consciousness. That's the following. It is like the consciousness is the context behind all context. It's a implicit cosmology, what is behind everything and what authorizes everything else, the purpose, the project, transformation of the world included. So the purpose also of our conference as well. So through this insight, so this idea as the top context, the cosmic consciousness, I have two questions. First, how can we interpret the cosmic consciousness? And that is the first straightforward question. The second, which relates to the first, is the following. The manifestation of the cosmic consciousness, which is what we are extensively speaking about, is that something that belongs to the faraway future, to the next generation? So shall that appear at an evolution that perhaps in centuries or millennia will become a prerequirement for everyone? So the point that we're getting at, or is it vice versa, a foundation of what we're doing? So the context of all context. So a place we want to go to, but also the one we come from. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this question. Thank you so much to the community of Living Ethics. Thank you so much to all of our friends who are making this event possible, international conversation around this on a topic which I believe is very up to date. So I start answering your second question already. So what does it come from? Why am I saying this is up to speed, up to, let's say, very current, very daily thing? Well, first of all, we have to say that the level of consciousness that it is still driving our earthly humanity is now and more incapable, unable to go for a better revolution. So we find ourselves in a very strange moment, in a very peculiar moment in history, has this consciousness which is somehow limited, which is lost in its objects, as Marina Bernardi used to say when we started this conference, a consciousness that forgets herself. And it is a consciousness that it is prisoner of our own world, of best to say, of the manifestations of the world. Then this consciousness, which can be identified with the earthly, with the mortal body, full of anguish, desperation. So this way, this level of consciousness, which we may call in many different ways, I love to call it ego-centered. For instance, it is an ego-centered and 𝗘𝗚-centered. Ego and 𝗘𝗚, they are anagrams, one of the other, also in Italian language. So it is very self-enclosed, and now that consciousness is showing year after year that is over, that it is in a state, in a terminally healed state. It is showing to Earth, it's been manifested on Earth through shapes of materialism, of violence on nature, of reductionism, consumism, nihilism. So many different forms which have come evidently to a final state, to a terminally healed state, because the apocalyptic warning is now daily news. And take the pandemics. Also, even more, we have experienced a kind of an apocalypse, if you will. That was there already, by the way. So this consciousness is no longer there, has no more history, no more evolution, hope for evolution ahead of it. But I do believe that at the same time, while it is a kind of exhausting itself through catastrophe, because it is now dominated by something very limited as it is, well, I must say that at the same time, it is emerging on the planet, and perhaps one by one or group by group, there is a growing awareness, which is way more dilated. And this more dilated consciousness, we may say that it is the consciousness of the universe. And now I explain that. It is like the universe is becoming conscious of itself and speaks about itself. And I'm now talking through the universe, right? And I'm a form of the universe itself, just like yourself. So you can actually ask yourself, so who am I? What else am I if not the universe becoming conscious, becoming aware of itself, and start speaking of oneself? And also, Mauro, there's one other thing that we should think about and we should consider. This is the very first time in history, as we know, then we've been able to rebuild, well, over the last few years, we've been able to rebuild the entire history of our universe. Through astrophysics, through cosmology sciences, we now know the 13.7 billion of years of this whole universe, which we are making starting from the Big Bang as we know it. But normally, when an entity, it is actually telling the whole story, it is because it is about to make a further leap, right? A jump ahead. It is like this consciousness of the universe, the story, the history of the universe. It is getting ready to a leap, to a quantic leap, a quantic consciousness leap to new ventures. I believe that the historical consciousness is the consciousness of the universe. There is a reawakening as a spirit. So ego, spirit, the self-awareness, spirit, I am the consciousness of the universe. I am the universe that is becoming conscious, aware of itself. And this very thing is becoming and is increasingly becoming, and faster, I have to say, this will become a necessity for evolution for many people and for the entire mankind, because the other option, so still being ruled by an egopathic consciousness, psychopath, to say it, so which is, of course, a split in itself, well, that, of course, takes to destruction. And so we are on the very eve, and that's why I very much appreciate the topic of this conference, because it's very much emphasizing the important moment that we're experiencing, so that we may open up our mind and our consciousness altogether. Well, thank you. My second consideration, Marco, I'd love to focus attention on the towards a cosmic consciousness that is towards what we're aiming to. I was making my own considerations over the last few days around this topic, and I read an author, Heidegger, who I know you love very much, in one of his workshops that he was doing with some psychiatrists, catering for his thought, and say he's talking about foundation. And Heidegger would say, what is the foundation? Well, foundation is what on which we reside. Anything that is as foundation. Foundation is the top layer that you can't overcome. It is the first element starting from which something is, may become known, and may be generated. So foundation is being and becoming. So this topic on foundations, I find it extremely interesting, because you must know that in the transpersonal conversation, there have been several opinions around cosmic consciousness. For instance, a Canadian physician used to say that there will be a spontaneous evolution of the consciousness towards a cosmic consciousness. To him, the first was the simple, the animals. The second was the self-consciousness of man, the one you mentioned, in its elementary state. And then transcending these two, the cosmic as a third. Therefore, we would have gone automatically, spontaneously towards that. But actually, he was said to be a mistake, because the ability for the man being self-conscious, it means that distance that I can perceive between me and the next stage, it means that I can either collaborate or I may actually hamper the future revolution. And if this is true, so cosmic consciousness has to do with will, with an act of will, at that point, Heidegger foundations conversation becomes crucial, because then we should consider those conditions for the state of being to really be, so that we can become. So the second point of reflection of my consideration is the following. And again, I split it in two different questions. Oh, you're so complicated in your language. My goodness. So cosmic consciousness, can it appear right now in contemporary man? Well, at least as a consequence of a certain education, of a certain culture, can actually appear right now as we speak. Can this happen? And the event, the answer is positive, then this can happen. What are the preconditions? What are the pre-requirements for that to happen? And more in specific, what is it that it makes it possible? What is it that allows men to evolve into that? And what is it that we need to include in our daily life? And what is it that we can't tolerate for us to be on this trip? That is my question. Well. I believe that the development of consciousness is a consciousness-based process. It is not spontaneous, it is not automatic, and there is awareness. Otherwise, we would be towards materialism. That means we would say that some material conditions, perhaps social conditions, would determine the development of consciousness, whereas the development of consciousness can be determined only by the development of the consciousness, and that is by spirit. The spirit, which nothing is if not self-consciousness, so consciousness of oneself in a spirit. Well, in my view, and according to the Western philosophy tradition, well, as a story, spirit as a story. And that is the history, is equivalent to the history of the world, history of civilizations, history of populations and religions, that otherwise it could not be explained any differently. But this is how we read it. What is it that makes different the Aztec civilization from the Greek civilization? Well, for sure, a way to have a self-consciousness, which is different. And these different ways of self-consciousness, well, these are the civilizations and the religions, which are, of course, at the basis of civilizations altogether. An Aztec, if we take an Aztec individual, they were warriors, right? And they would worship 𝗦𝗦𝗓𝗓, the sun. And they would go for major wars and conflict, not for geographical purposes like the Romans would do, but to get more slaves and sacrifice the slaves to the god 𝗦𝗓𝗓, because that was their consciousness. That was the level of their consciousness they had attained, right? God is sun, sun to rise tomorrow, it needs blood, it needs a sacrifice, it needs hearts being offered. And this is why they would go for sacrifices. Well, we do something different. So why are we doing something different today? Well, because the self-consciousness has a history, has a long story. It does develop, and it's kind of ambiguous, if you will, but it does develop, it does evolve. So we should actually interrogate ourselves, saying, in what stage of the history of spirit are we in? What is the current state? What is the current stage in which consciousness is becoming increasingly more aware of this creative freedom? So it can be creative self-consciousness, the ego creating the universe, the creative consciousness ongoing. And this is what I am. This is what I am right now for the universe, for the sake of universe. I'm saying words, I'm speaking words, and the spirit of the universe, it is emitting in the history right now in a brand new way for that to grow, for consciousness to grow. So, starting from these preconditions, it is clear that man shall actively help and support according to the state where he is. So today, according to what we're saying, human being is strongly pushed to go for a new awareness, to very much get away from an isolated small ego consciousness, which is becoming a prison where he can no longer breathe in, to open up and unveil in his own nature, in his own divine, creative, and free nature. This is the stage. That's a state. Of course, for us to be able to collaborate to the development of our own self-consciousness and spirit, well, this is a very precise job that doesn't come as natural, as you were saying earlier a few minutes ago. It doesn't come as natural, I can tell you. Well, actually, instinctively, we would actually forget about ourselves. We tend to forget. This is why Buddha says that the spiritual work always go against it, is being against the current. And this is why Jesus, you say, many are called, few are actually going through the narrow gateway of the evolution. Very few go there because it's difficult and it requires will, free will, an act of will, but it has to be a super powerful one. It has to be daily. There have to be daily practice, daily efforts. There have to be groups sharing this work and supporting each other. We have to be against a wave of darkness, because as it happens in evolution, the strength of darkness of the past are actually now flourishing, and they're there all together to hamper birth. And that is the archetype of the persecution from Herod when Christ was born, the new humanity, the new cosmic consciousness. When it is born, well, of course, all the powers are in a coalition to get rid of it, right? So you need culture, you need a common language, you need an inner battle, and you need disciplines and practices for us to collaborate on all that together. And I believe that slowly we human beings, in small groups perhaps, we are now collaborating to deliver all of that. Well, Marco, thank you. Then I'd love to reconnect to darkness, as you just mentioned, as my next piece of analysis. And I hope, and from this conversation, perhaps there will new conversations will emerge. So the problem of evil, the problem of alienation, or of the darkness, or the reason why it doesn't come as natural, as you say, being ourselves. Well, to me, it's a key aspect, and it is also part of Agni yoga topics, and there are many interpretations of the evil, of the sin, and I will try to summarize what I'm trying to ask around this. Uh, well, the precondition the pre-assumption of the cosmic consciousness is that we are already unite with the being, right? It may sound weird, but actually my body, my organism is being recharged biologically, because actually there is life, there is no void in me, because if there was a void in me and my body could not recharge energy as a living human body. So before anything else, a priori, I am a being. There's an ontologic connection between myself and the being, right? And from the essence and substance standpoint, well, the fact that I can speak to you is because we have a common denominator. We do understand each other. If I understand something, well, it means that between myself and the object, there's something in common, and the being cannot contradict itself. It can't generate pain. It can only generate something that is complete. The being cannot go wrong, because if it were going wrong, that would mean a bottom line contradiction. There can't be contradiction. So the principle of non-contradiction is substantial, is key, is not a language gimmick. And that is the first thing. The second, whilst I'm observing the people around me, there is pain. There is a psychoanalysis say that we're constantly in sin, as religion say, that we're constantly split in ourselves, and the condition is that we're kind of a foreign body to ourselves. So the essence, I am connected to the being, does not coincide to the fact that we are foreigner to ourselves. And not only we are foreigner to ourselves, and that is my next question, is that when we analyze our inner self, and tell me if you agree on that, well, that residual truth that is there sees our pain as something that is an alien, something that is being imposed, something that is not consistent with what we are, something that is foreign to us. And this is what we perceive. It's not that we perceive pain as something that is part of us. And that, of course, implies a problem. Now, we do have a few minutes left, but all cosmologies in the world, they say that something weird has happened, an extra, foreign extra happened in man's life, and there has been a loss of union, of unity between ourselves and the being. And but if we, for instance, read about schizophrenia, which is the imposition of the foreign to the patient, and sometimes there are people perceiving a machine speaking inside them that is not theirs, and a psychiatrist, well, they say the same thing. So, of course, religion, they call it decay, and some other people call it the loss of the golden age, and the psychiatry speaks about the foreign being to the man itself. Now, my question is, this is what I'd love to come. Isn't that we're split in ourselves for more profound reasons, and profound reasons which are not associated to culture, religion, you name it, there's a different reason which really alienates us from the life that we should be part of, where we should be totally connected to. So what I'm trying to ask, if you allow me, so schizophrenia, the evil, is that something that in a path of transformation, the day transformation you were talking about, is that something that I should interpret as human? So is the evil human? Is a kind of a young shadow, something that I have to incorporate as part of myself, or something that is non-human, that is overlayer, something that I do not myself mirror myself into, because that is not human, is non-human. So what is the darkness in a nutshell? Oh, wow, wow. How long do I have? 6 months to answer this question? Okay, nice. Well, I'll try to simplify. Well, no doubt that the human being in all times and in all places that we have memory of has perceived his life, is living in a very paradox manner, if you allow me, and in a very tragic manner, which is what you have described somehow. All men, all human beings have perceived what Kant used to call the absent, so being absent of, right? So being in the contradiction, being contradictory, being a consciousness that it is wandering around in times and spaces, but still it is a mortal body that is destined to disappear, to become ashes. So that condition, which is a condition of prison, as we said, of a prisoner, so the consciousness limiting itself to the mortal cage, and it is full of poison as well. Well, that condition, from that condition, men have tried to get rid of it, to free themselves from it. And all the philosophy and spiritual religions that we are aware of, even the most evolved one, well, there are all ways and pathways on how to free ourselves from this contradiction, from this state of paradox that we perceive, and from this state of perceiving pain. And all pathways are seeking for salvation. Well, the concept of salvation, it can be modulated in many different ways, but it is actually being freed from this state. Now, why do we find ourselves in such a state of separation? Well, pathways will differentiate according to the revelation, what the revelation says. So man, as such, cannot reply to this question. He can understand that he is in a state of separation, that he is in a contradiction, is in a paradox. He wants to free himself from it, but then salvation has to come from dimensions which are overcoming his ordinary consciousness. And such dimensions which are overcoming the ordinary consciousness and still enlightening, the human beings, they call it divine revelations, right? And normally sacred texts starting from Veda to prophets, to the Hebrew prophets, Jewish, they are poems in a way. Why are they poems? Well, because the ego started to listen and has received some words like in a pace of a poem, saying something around what each one of us would love to know about. And that is exactly the answer to your question. So to answer your question, actually, philosophy is not enough. Western philosophy very much ends in the awareness that it is unable to answer these questions around the origin of the evil, as to why we find ourselves in this scenario. After Hegel's attempt, because Hegel had neutralized the negativity, hence the evil, as a function of becoming, but that is something that we are not convinced about. And actually, the following century completely kind of denies or contradicts what Hegel said. We can't say that Gulag and Lager are actually means for us to bring forward the development of consciousness. Of course, that's not the case. There's a mystery of evil that does not resolve in Hegel's. So either you give up answering, or you accept, you give credit to some words which have been unveiled by subjects, by individuals who have come up, who have appeared in the world as the bearer of the answer. Now, in the Christian Jewish tradition, the mystery of the fall, it is a pre-human mystery. When Adam and Eve, still preserving the archetype, when they fall from Eden, is because they obey to an entity, the snake, that was there, right? So the fall had already happened, had already taken place, had taken place on other cosmic planes, and the fall of the angels will have generated the fall of mankind on this planet, right? Because then cosmic consciousness actually opens up to a much bigger, much larger interpretation within this cosmos. And actually the most advanced cosmos even is hypothesizing a cosmic matrix. And actually this cosmos, we know it would be only one of the many different universes which are manifesting from the matrix, but we don't know. So Blaise Pascal, the philosopher, speaking through the original sin, speaking through the dogma, which is very, very difficult to accept, used to say, well, I know it's difficult to accept, but unless we accept it, human condition cannot be understood. And this is was said by a man who was also a scientist, a mathematician, a rational. And I must be honest here, I have studied extensively all traditions, and I have to say that no answer convinced me more than the fall that we come from, we derive from, but that it can somehow be understood. And that is the Christ minister of redemption, the mystery indeed of a kind of redemption that allows us to understand the separation, the fall. So the new humanity, this ego, this self that recognizes itself as a spirit of the cosmos, that self finds redemption. It is no longer a self that comes from the wound, from the psychoanalytic wound, but it is actually a self that keeps flourishing from the source of being as creative consciousness. And that is the direction that I'm fascinated by. And that has convinced me to listen to Pascal first and foremost, and I am betting on that. I'm betting my entire life on that orientation. And I must say something that I'm now 65 years old. I can't complain too much about it. I don't feel betrayed I don't feel cheated in my hopes. I'm not disappointed. I'm not disappointed at all. I'm actually reassured, to the point that over the last 2 decades in our groups, we actually speak through this in this workshop. And I love the way you called it, the workshop, a request, a research, experimental, modern research. Well, now I don't know whether I have a few more minutes. We need to finish. We need to close at 9. Well, reconnecting to what you just said, I have one last question, if you allow me. Criteria of the future ethics. And again, I will try to summarize. This is very dense. This can be very dense again. If we start from the assumption, which is what you started with, that is the cosmic consciousness starts from understanding that we are the universe that speaks about itself, and the human existence is valuable when actually embodies the mandate in this general consciousness. Hence, the goal of our life looks static, so to live we actually from static has to become dynamic. So we need to live to mediate life in history. So if it does have this dynamic state, hence choice has to do with ethics. And ethics it means probing and understanding more the categories, the right or wrong, the good and the evil. And it is also the science that investigates how we can understand the act of will to modify the reality that I'm faced with. So how am I using my will in a nutshell? So the frailty of this time, as you were saying before, well, this frailty has perhaps now created a brand new chance, a new mission. Perhaps one of the key missions we now have is to have a new ethical criteria based on the new perspective. And if we're talking about the cosmic consciousness, and then my question is, what is the criterion that shall orientate my actions daily under this perspective? As Plato used to say, if I'm unable to understand the criteria, which comes from Latin iudico, then I can't have an act of will unless I understand. I can only express my will if I'm able to understand. And but then we do have endless criteria. We have empirical, we have the evidence-based, and it depends. We do have the interpretation, we have hermeneutics, we have the perspective, the point of view. I may have the essence, the planet, the cosmos. We have the criteria of purpose, interpretation, nature, life, history, and all of these criteria I believe it cannot really be understood, let's say, can appear as fragmented to people. And there's no common denominator, a formal one that allows us to orientate all of these criteria. I know what your question is, and now I have 3 minutes to answer, so you should allow me to answer now. So is there a general universal criteria that put this criteria all together that comes from the cosmic consciousness? That is my question. Well, I think that what you call criterion, that is the orientation of the behavior, is intrinsic in the development of the consciousness. It is not something that can be recommended from the outside. It is the same. It is the conscious itself that, whilst becoming spiritual self-consciousness, has its own criteria. And some of these are evident, are clear. The egoic, the ego-based, our small ego, which comes from separation, it is indeed a consciousness that is very selfish. Think about people who are seeking for pleasure, for power, for money. The consciousness means only catching, fetching. Whereas the consciousness of the spiritual ego we are aiming at, it first of all has to do with the universal interconnection. We are one, myself and yourself, we are one with all the nature, with we are physically, spiritually one. So it goes without saying that the fundamental criteria will not be the one of catching, of stealing, of robbing, but it will be simply the circulation of these goods, material goods as well as spiritual goods, because circulation of the good translates into being itself. So if we want to use terminology which we haven't used so far, but we can now use it because people can now understand, the criteria is love. This criterion is love, but not the emotional and not even the moral one. It's the love has organic order of the being, whose spiritual consciousness is the self-awareness. So the more I will be that self, the more, as opposed to taking, I will give out. Christ, that for Christians is the divine man, he doesn't take, but he gives. You take, you eat. Whereas Adam, Eve actually had caught the forbidden fruit, the Son of God gives out so that people can take. And in this way, by donating, self-fulfills itself. And this is a initiation criteria. It is not moral based, but it is spiritual. And this is where we are. It's 9 o'clock.
Bene.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you. Yes, that was excellent. Spot on. Thank you for being with us today, Marco and Mauro. That was an informative, uplifting, inspiring conversation on the new consciousness. You have given us much to reflect upon. You spoke to a growing awareness in the midst of this all systems breakdown on the planet. Perhaps we could say we are simultaneously in the midst of an all systems breakthrough, and the criteria is love. And as you said, Marco, we are the universe becoming aware of itself. There is a reawakening to spirit. We open to cosmic consciousness as we leap ahead into the new era. And it is necessary we open to this consciousness together. Bless you both for being with us. May we all answer the call. Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie a tutti anche.